If you're watching this, you probably got the Deciblaster, or you're considering purchasing it. Well, let's talk about why you shouldn't do that right here. So, the Deciblaster is one of the sound weapons, one of the boombox weapons that makes enemies dance if you eliminate them or if you hit them, or basically those are the two things for the Deciblaster. But, in this case, it can also bounce around and hit a lot of enemies at once. It'll also cost you 30 energy cells per shot. That's very important, okay? I don't tend to like to factor cost into like my review of weapons, but it matters when it's that expensive. So let's talk about the Deciblaster. It does do a lot of decent damage. It can bounce multiple times. It can eliminate really, really well. The copy I was given was crit rating double crit damage, which isn't really how I'd like to run it. I don't tend to prefer crit damage on launchers, and I actually have a really good clip of why I don't like that. So I was shooting the nurse zombie, and she was constantly healing, and I just could not crit. I did eventually eliminate her without critting, but oh my goodness, when you have to rely on crits, especially with something this expensive, it's not something I prefer. When you do shoot into crowds of zombies, and especially when you're bouncing every single time, every single impact on every individual zombie has a chance to crit. So if it bounces up and down, you do have multiple chances to crit. So I can understand how that can work there, but I like to get the most consistent bang for my buck when it comes to a launcher, so that's where I would not prefer crit damage, and we'll talk about that later, but that's kind of how this weapon is usable. You really need to have something to bounce against, or else it's really just not getting its full potential. So if you have a trap tunnel, for example, as I kind of set up here, just a fake little 1x1 here, you can kind of bounce it around and hit multiple walls and hit multiple enemies. Now, if you're in the end game, I don't love shooting into trap tunnels because not only will propanes explode everything, but we don't really use trap tunnels in the current climate of the game because propanes are very overpowered. They were already overpowered, and then Epic made them even stronger where they blow up tunnels when they're on low health. I genuinely don't even know if that got changed. I just know that every single time I set up a trap tunnel, exploding death bombs or not, it disappears. So I actually just put ceiling electric fields a couple tiles up, or tire traps 3 tiles up, etc., or just use defenders or shoot them with our guns. My point is, we don't tend to have trap tunnels, but even if you do have trap tunnels set up, if you're kind of a player who knows what they're doing, the trap tunnel should be doing most of the job. You see, my point is, what I'm getting to here is there's very little reason for you to be shooting into a trap tunnel, and that means that the Deciblaster has even less circumstances where it's actually usable. And that's kind of my gripe with this weapon. It's the reason you never see me use it. It's the reason I've never talked about it, because it's very, very expensive, and it's kind of just hard to find any circumstance where this is a better option than some of the other ones. And that's a big one. I know some people don't like it when I compare weapons, but it's important because the Deciblaster, if it was the only launcher in the game, hell yeah, go crazy. But it's not. We've got the bazooka, we've got the jackal launcher, we've got the Santa's little helper, we've got the deatomizer. All the kiddos running around have weapon vouchers right now, so all of this is completely available, except for the jackal launcher. Sorry if you didn't win the RNG lottery with that. I understand. It took me a lot of llamas in 2 years to get my own copy, so I understand. But the Metal Marauder is another one. All of these things explode on impact and don't cost energy cells, except for the deatomizer, which is something I want to mention. It costs 35 energy cells per shot, I think. I don't ever remember. My point is, it is worth the ammo. Now, what's funny is in the clip I recorded here, I actually didn't crit. I do run crit damage on this, and that's very specific to this weapon. I'll link my video below. I explained it very clearly there, but it's a much better bang for your buck, and you'll be hitting a lot more enemies with it. It's my preferred method of choice of eliminating enemies. But if you're using something like the Santa's Little Helper, which hits really hard, so does a Metal Marauder, or the Sod Buster, the new one, it's just a much better, more effective way of eliminating enemies all at once, and the Deciblaster doesn't really impress me in that regard. So yeah, that's basically my analysis. Either it hits for low damage because you kind of have to bounce it, or you are in a position where it is bouncing, but the traps should be doing their job anyway, and you should probably stay away from the tunnels and let them do their job. So without further ado, if the Deciblaster is something you'd like to perk up, and it is something you'd like to try, let's talk about how you should perk it and kind of what you should be thinking about. It has a really decent impact, like really, really good. So if that's something that's important to you, there are cheaper options, but if that's something that's important to you, then you could roll, a couple of impact perks on this. I would highly recommend a reload perk, except for immediately as recording, this is one of those times where there's a reload glitch in the game where when you switch between weapons, it instantly reloads. I will not be perking this based off of that. Obviously, it's a fact factor immediately as of recording, but I expect this to be patched any moment. So if you're watching this in the future and there's some kind of reload glitch, then there you go. But it shouldn't be relevant even a few days after today's upload. So I definitely recommend a reload perk on all your launchers, and I'm not going to change the perks on my copy personally, but damage is highly recommended. Now, you do have a couple of damage to dancing enemies perks here, and I'm not really sure if I'm a fan of that. It really depends on how many targets you're shooting. So in an encampment, for example, just kidding, you wouldn't be using this in an encampment because you'd have to build, it wouldn't be able to bounce anywhere. Encampments are very open-ended. I wouldn't recommend this in encampment. So unless you're defending something with tunnels, maybe you'd have a lot of dancing enemies here, or you could pair this with sound walls. If you really wanted to maximize your Deciblaster, maybe set up a tunnel with sound walls where you can bounce across it. That would actually be really cool. In the middle of recording this, I want to say, if you make like a one by one tunnel going, you know, a long distance, and then alternate sound walls, and then have a bunch of dancing enemies go through, and you perk up your Deciblaster to have double damage to dancing enemies, that could actually be a really effective, you know, setup for this launcher, but it'd be a really niche way to play, and I don't even know that I'd recommend that. So the damage to dancing enemies is a little bit hard to activate. Either you need to hit an enemy and hope for the chance, or eliminate an enemy, in which case you're already doing your job. So the damage to dancing enemies can be more effective against the fatties, but it won't affect mist monsters, and that's a big deal because the mist monsters are what's going to take multiple hits. So frankly, with like most launchers, I would recommend just triple damage reload, or even damage to mist monsters and bosses, seeing as double damage should be more than adequate for normal zombies. And of course, as I always like to say, if you are an absolute fiend for the most amount of damage possible, crit rating double crit damage would give you the most potential damage, but as I've already demonstrated, I really don't like to roll the dice, especially when it comes to a launcher, especially when that launcher is as expensive to operate as this one is. And we left ours physical just because launchers are insanely strong anyway. You tend to not need an element, but of course, if you're shooting against elemental enemies like we are in the higher end zones, energy is probably preferred. I wouldn't really recommend an element on this because if you're going to run an element on any weapon, then you're going to want for example, if I ended up running nature on this, I'd probably want a fire and a water one just to back this weapon up so I can have complete coverage. As of recording, again, this might be very different in the future. They seem to be doing this thing where they keep giving one element per mission. Like, look, in the middle of recording, I'll just check the map and I'll demonstrate how everything is just fire right now. Let me go to the high zones. You know, fire element, fire, fire, fire. I mean, some of these specific ones are ice storm, but pretty much every normal mission, and especially the 4 players, are all just firestorm, firestorm, firestorm. And recently it was nature storm. So I don't know why they're doing this, but as of recording this, since we're having firestorms all the time, perhaps a water element might be preferred. And if you're watching in the future and they have a water element everywhere, maybe you'd want to go nature. Now that's true for all of your weapons, but in general, I would recommend energy and just keep it simple. And that would probably be the, you know, cheapest, smartest way to just leave it and kind of be lazy about it. So there you go. Those are the best perks for the Deciblaster. That's kind of why I don't love this weapon. I never like to say any weapon is bad. I like to explain why it's not used, because anything could change. Maybe they'll make this weapon do a little bit more damage per hit. Maybe it'll have some kind of effect in the future. I don't know. As of now, I won't be seeing any use out of it. I haven't been wildly impressed, but I think it was Skulls who dropped me a copy of this. I'm probably getting that wrong, but I know he really likes this weapon. So if I got the name wrong, thank you to whoever gave me this weapon. Correct me in the comments, and I'll pin any kind of correction to this video down there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you guys want to, you know, use code Mista at your checkout, I'd really appreciate it. If you guys want to support the channel, get some nice perks here. You can become a channel member right there, you know. Join button and the link is also in the description, so you get a couple of options there. Hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. And then